Alright, let's talk about the Greek gods. When you picture them, what comes to mind? Probably these majestic, super buff figures carved out of marble, right? Staring off into the distance from a museum pedestal, looking all wise and powerful. Well, I want you to take that image, crumple it up, and toss it out. Because the reality of the Greek gods, the way the ancient Greeks actually saw them, was so much more messy, so much more dramatic, and honestly, so much more human. Forget the serene, untouchable deities. Think of it less like a divine council and more like the most high-stakes reality TV show ever produced. The stage is Mount Olympus, a glittering palace in the clouds, but the glamour is just a thin veil over a hotbed of scandal, betrayal, and backstabbing. Welcome to Keeping Up with the Olympians. At the heart of this cosmic drama is a family, a deeply, profoundly dysfunctional family, whose personal squabbles and messy love lives didn't just make for good gossip, they shaped the fate of the entire world. These weren't abstract forces or philosophical concepts. The gods of ancient Greece were characters, with all the flaws and baggage that implies. They were driven by the same raw, powerful emotions that drive us. They felt blinding rage, all-consuming lust, crippling jealousy, and breathtaking vanity. The difference is, when they acted on those feelings, the consequences were, literally, an argument between brothers could cause earthquakes and tsunamis. A moment of divine vanity could spark a decade-long war that would wipe out an entire generation of heroes. And here's the kicker. Their drama never stayed on Olympus. We, the mortals down below, were their audience, their playthings. And often, the unfortunate collateral damage. The gods weren't distant observers, they were active, meddling participants in human affairs. They would choose favorites, sabotage enemies, disguise themselves to walk among us, and use humanity as the chessboard for their own personal games. Attracting the attention of a god wasn't always a good thing. It could make you a king, a hero, or a prophet. Or it could get your entire family cursed for generations and turn you into a spider or a cow. It was a total crapshoot. So, for this journey, we're not just looking at the myths as simple stories of heroes and monsters. We're peeling back the curtain to look at the divine personalities who pulled the strings. We're diving into the personal stories, the petty and the epic love affairs that motivated these all-powerful beings. This is the story of a celestial family whose passions and poisons spilled down from the heavens and watered the soil of human history. To understand them, you have to understand their relationship. And there's no better place to start than with the king of the gods himself, the patriarch of this chaotic clan. So, at the top of this whole Olympian enterprise, you have the CEO, the big boss, the king of the gods, Zeus. And if Olympus was a corporation, Zeus would be the kind of CEO who's brilliant at what he does, but whose HR file is a mile long and reads like a horror story. He's the god of the sky, the wielder of the thunderbolt, the dispenser of justice. He's the one who overthrew his own tyrannical father, Cronus, who, you'll remember, used to eat his own children. Zeus freed his siblings from his father's stomach and led them in a 10-year war against the Titans. He won, established a new world order, and took the throne on Mount Olympus. He's powerful, he's decisive, and he commands respect. But for a guy in charge of law and order, he had absolutely zero. Zeus's entire reign can basically be summed up in two activities: governing the cosmos and cheating on his wife. And frankly, he spent a lot more time and creative energy on the latter. His lust was legendary, insatiable, and completely indiscriminate. If it moved, Zeus probably considered it. Goddesses, nymphs, mortal queens, young princesses, it didn't matter. He was an equal opportunity pursuer, and his pursuit was less like a romantic courtship and more like a divine-level special ops mission. His methods were, to put it lightly, deeply problematic. Zeus was the master of disguise, a shapeshifter who rarely, if ever, approached his targets as himself. Why? Because a giant, bearded man descending from the heavens surrounded by lightning isn't exactly subtle. And more importantly, deception was his favorite tool. For Leda, he became a beautiful swan. For the Princess Europa, he transformed into a magnificent, gentle white bull. For Dano, he became a shower of golden rain, trickling into her locked chamber. He even disguised himself as the husband of Alcmene, tricking her into sleeping with him and conceiving the hero Heracles. Notice a pattern here. This isn't about love or romance. It's about conquest. It's about an assertion of power. Zeus saw something he wanted, and he took it. The idea of consent was, let's say, a foreign concept to the king of the gods. His affairs were an extension of his dominion. Just as he ruled the skies, he sought to possess and dominate on earth. Every affair, every child he sired, was another way of stamping his authority on the mortal world, of spreading his divine lineage far and wide. The landscape of Greek mythology is literally littered with his demigod children heroes like Hera, Perseus, and Minasol walking, talking, reminders of the king's appetites. This created a constant, simmering tension on Mount Olympus, because Zeus wasn't just a bachelor playing the field. He was married, and his wife was not just any goddess. She was Hera, his sister, the queen of heaven, and every single one of Zeus's conquests was a direct insult to her power, her domain, and her pride. Zeus may have been the king of the gods, but he was also the undisputed king of making bad decisions driven by his libido. And while he usually got away with it, the women he pursued and the children they bore were left to face the consequences, and the primary consequence had a name: Hera. Now, if Zeus is the philandering CEO, then his wife, Hera, is the terrifyingly competent and deeply wronged coup, who knows exactly what's going on and is sharpening her knives. But that's doing her a massive disservice. She is a powerhouse in her own right. She's Zeus's sister, and as a daughter of Cronus and Rhea, she's one of the original 6 Olympians. She has status, she has power, and she has immense pride. As the goddess of childbirth, she would prevent Zeus's lovers from being able to give birth, cursing them with unimaginable pain and endless labor. Every act of vengeance was a desperate attempt to reclaim her power and dignity, to punish those who she saw as accomplices in her humiliation. She becomes this tragic, terrifying figure, a goddess whose defining characteristic is a reaction to her husband's failings. She is the queen of scorn, and her stories are a chilling reminder that in the world of the gods, there was nothing more dangerous than being the other woman. Their marriage wasn't just a romantic union, it was a political alliance that solidified the new Olympian order. She is supposed to be his equal, his queen, but Zeus's constant, flagrant affairs publicly humiliated her, time and time again. Each mortal woman he pursued, each demigod child he sired, was a direct attack on her authority and her domain. Hera is the queen of the gods, and her portfolio is, well, it's the definition of irony. She is the goddess of marriage, women, childbirth, and family. It's her job to protect the sanctity of the marital bond, and yet, her own husband is the single greatest threat to that sanctity in the entire cosmos. Imagine being the goddess of marriage and being married to Zeus. It's a cosmic joke, and Hera is not laughing. It's easy to paint Hera as just the jealous wife, this one-dimensional, nagging shrew. Think about the sheer powerlessness of her situation. She's the queen of everything, but she can't actually punish the one person who is truly responsible. Her husband, Zeus, is the king. He's stronger than her, and a direct confrontation is a losing battle. He holds all the cards. So what does she do with all that divine rage, that righteous fury? She redirects it. She can't touch Zeus, so she goes after the next best thing, the other woman, and the children, with a vengeance that is both terrifyingly creative and horrifyingly cruel. Hera's wrath wasn't a simple temper tantrum. It was a form of art. She was the master of the long-term curse, of psychological torment. She wouldn't just strike you down with a lightning bolt. That was Zeus's crude style. Hera would ruin your life, your children's lives, and your children's children's lives. She would turn you into a monster, hound you across the known world, and ensure you never knew a moment's peace. She sent serpents to strangle the infant Heracles in his crib. She drove Dionysus's foster parents mad, causing them to murder their own children. Her cruelty knew no bounds, and it was laser-focused on the living, breathing evidence of her husband's infidelity. She weaponized her own power against the very people she was supposed to protect. So, we've talked about Zeus, the serial cheater, and Hera, the queen of vengeance. But to really understand the devastating human costs of their toxic dynamic, we need to look at a specific case study, and there is no better, or more tragic, example than the story of Io. This isn't a story of a hero being born. It's the story of a woman's life being systematically and completely destroyed. Io was a princess, a priestess of Hera. Ironically enough, in her hometown of Argos, at any given time, only 2 of his eyes would sleep, while the other 98 remained wide awake and watchful. For Io, this was a living nightmare. She had no rest, no privacy, no moment of peace. She was constantly being watched. She wandered the earth, still in the form of a cow, and eventually came to her father's riverbank. She tried to communicate with her family, scratching her name, Io, in the dust with her hoof. Their grief was immense, but they couldn't help her. She was just living her life, doing her job, when she caught the eye of Zeus. Hermes, disguised as a shepherd, played a reed pipe and told Argus boring stories until, one by one, all 100 eyes closed in sleep. Hermes then killed the giant. But this didn't free Io. An enraged Hera simply escalated. She took Argus's eyes and placed them on the tail of her favorite bird, the peacock, creating its iconic pattern. And for Io she sent a new tormentor, a relentless, vicious gadfly, divinely engineered to sting and bite the poor cow, driving her into a frenzy of pain and madness, forcing her to run endlessly across the entire world. This is a horror story. It's a tale of what happens when mortals become pawns in the gods' cruel games. And as we know, once Zeus decides he wants someone, their opinion on the matter is largely irrelevant. He started visiting her in her dreams, whispering to her, trying to lure her out to the fields. When that didn't work, he took a more direct approach. One day he descended from Olympus and covered the land in a thick, dark cloud to hide his actions from his ever-watchful wife. He cornered Io and had his way with her. Of course, a giant, unnatural cloud appearing out of nowhere is basically a huge red flag for Hera. She immediately knew something was up. She came hurtling down to earth to investigate, and Zeus, caught in the act, panicked. Playing it cool, she complimented the beautiful animal and casually asked Zeus if she could have it as a gift. What could Zeus say? If he refused, it would be an admission of guilt. He was trapped. So, he handed over the cow. He handed over Io too, his furious wife. Hera, now in possession of her rival, was ready to begin her torture. In a split-second decision to cover his tracks, he did something truly awful. He didn't stand up to his wife. He didn't protect the woman he had just violated. Instead, he transformed Io into a beautiful, sleek, white cow. Think about the sheer horror and dehumanization of that moment. 1 second, you are a princess, a person. The next, you are livestock, unable to speak, unable to explain what happened. Hera arrived, saw Zeus standing next to a very conspicuous white cow, and she was not fooled for a second. First, she assigned a guard to the cow Argus. Zeus finally felt a pang of something resembling guilt and sent the trickster god Hermes to deal with the situation. Now, if you thought Io's story was a one-off, a particularly brutal anomaly, you'd be mistaken. This was Hera's standard operating procedure. And another one of her most famous targets was a titaness named Leto. Unlike Io, Leto wasn't immortal. She was a goddess herself, which you might think would offer her some protection. It did not. When Zeus had an affair with Leto and she became pregnant, Hera's fury was absolute. This wasn't just another death. This was a titaness carrying the children of the king of the gods. These children would be powerful, a direct threat to Hera's own lineage and status. So she set out to make Leto's life a living hell, specifically targeting her as a mother. Hera's first move was a masterclass in divine pettiness and cruelty. She issued a cosmic decree, a curse that reverberated throughout the world. She forbade any land, any island, any place on the surface of the earth that was touched by the sun, from offering refuge to the pregnant Leto. Essentially, she made the entire world hostile territory. Imagine being 9 months pregnant, desperate to find a safe place to give birth, and everywhere you turn, the land itself rejects you. Islands would tremble and hide beneath the waves as she approached. Peninsulas would recoil. She was an exile, a divine refugee, hounded from place to place, with no sanctuary to be found. On top of this, Hera had the great serpent Pathona, monstrous, ancient, chthonic beast, Leto, ensuring she could never rest. She was exhausted, in labor, and being chased by a giant monster. It was a nightmare scenario. And where was Zeus in all of this? The father of her children, mostly absent. He was either unwilling or unable to directly defy Hera's curse. The best he could do was work around the edges. His brother, Poseidon, the god of the sea, took pity on Leto. He guided her to a strange, floating island named Delos. This island was the loophole, because Delos wasn't fixed to the ocean floor. It technically wasn't land in the traditional sense. It was just a barren, rocky mass adrift on the sea. Here, and only here, could Leto finally find a place to give birth. But Hera had one more card to play. As the goddess of childbirth, she had a certain amount of control over, well, childbirth. She actively prevented her daughter Ili, who was the specific goddess of labor and delivery, from going to Leto's aid. So Leto was stuck on this desolate rock, in agonizing labor for 9 days and 9 nights, unable to deliver her children. Finally, the other goddesses on Olympus had had enough of Hera's cruelty. They bribed Eileithyia with a beautiful necklace, and she snuck away to Delos to help. At last, clinging to a sacred palm tree, Leto gave birth. And these weren't just any children. First came Artemis, the fierce goddess of the hunt, and then her twin brother, Apollo, the radiant god of music, prophecy, and the sun. These two would grow up to be among the most powerful and revered of all the Olympians. They were born out of their mother's suffering and exile, and they never forgot it. The story of Leto isn't just about Hera's jealousy. It's an origin story for two major deities, one forged in pain, persecution, and the sheer, desperate resilience of a mother on the run. So far, we've seen Zeus transform a woman into a cow and force another to give birth while being chased by a sea monster. But not all of his affairs ended in pure, unadulterated torment, at least, not for the woman involved. She was exceptionally beautiful, and one day, while she was out picking flowers with her friends by the seashore, she caught the attention of Zeus. This time, instead of a cloud or a shower of gold, Zeus chose a disguise that was both brilliant and deeply deceptive. He transformed himself into a magnificent white bull. But this wasn't just any bull. It was the most perfect creature you could imagine. Pure white, with horns that shimmered like polished jewels. Only there did he finally reveal his true form, the majestic and intimidating king of the gods. What happened next varies a bit depending on the version of the myth, but the outcome is the same. Europa became another one of Zeus's lovers, but unlike Io or Leto, her story takes a different turn. She wasn't tormented by Hera for reasons that aren't entirely clear. She seems to have mostly escaped the queen's wrath. Instead of a life of misery, she became royalty, and an aura of complete and utter tranquility. It didn't seem wild or dangerous. It seemed gentle, almost magical. Minos, most famously, would become the king of Crete, establishing the powerful Minoan civilization, one of the earliest advanced civilizations in Europe. He's the King Minos of the Minotaur legend. So, in this case, Zeus's lustful abduction directly leads to the foundation of a new royal dynasty in the grand, symbolic narrative of the Greeks. The beginning of a new cultural sphere, the landmass to which Zeus brought her would eventually come to be known as Europe. It's a fascinatingly complex story. It begins with deception and abduction, a clear violation, but ends with the establishment of legacy, civilization, and history. It perfectly encapsulates how the personal, amoral actions of the gods were seen as the strange and often unsettling seeds from which the human world grew. Some were less about long-term torture and more about deception, abduction, and the founding of entire civilizations. This brings us to the story of Europa, a tale so significant that an entire continent is named after her. Europa was a Phoenician princess, the daughter of a king. The bull wandered over to where the girls were playing, and instead of being frightened, they were captivated. It knelt before them, allowing them to pet it and adorn its horns with flower garlands. It was charming. Europa, being the boldest of the group, was particularly enchanted. She felt a strange sense of safety and wonder around this creature. After a while, feeling completely at ease, she playfully climbed onto the bull's broad back, and that's when the trap was sprung. The second she was seated, the gentle bull sprang to its feet. It charged away from her screaming friends, straight into the sea. But it didn't sink. With the princess clinging to its back, the divine bull galloped across the waves, moving as easily on water as it had on land. Europa was terrified, realizing she had been tricked and was now being abducted, carried away from her home and family to an unknown fate. This wasn't a consensual trip. It was a kidnapping, albeit a very scenic one. Zeus carried her across the sea to the island of Crete. On Crete, Europa bore Zeus 3 sons, who would become legendary figures in their own right, Rhadamanthus and Saturn. While the drama between Zeus and Hera was definitely the main event on Mount Olympus, it would be a mistake to think they were the only ones causing trouble. The entire pantheon was a bubbling cauldron of petty squabbles, vanity contests, and reckless meddling. The other gods and goddesses were just as flawed, just as driven by their egos, and just as willing to use mortals as pawns in their personal games. If Zeus and Hera's fights were the epic season-long story arcs, the antics of the other gods were the chaotic and often deadly one-off episodes. Take, for example, the goddess of love and beauty herself, Aphrodite, to Apollo's thin-skinned reactions to anyone who challenged his musical ability. The pattern is clear. The gods were emotionally volatile. They demanded respect, worship, and, above all, acknowledgement of their superiority. Stepping on their toes, even accidentally, was like playing Russian roulette. Their squabbles weren't just background noise. They were the engine of so many myths, driving mortals to acts of heroism or to their doom, often for reasons that seem completely trivial to us. It shows a world where humanity is constantly walking on eggshells, trying not to upset the powerful, emotionally unstable landlords who live upstairs. You'd think she'd be all about creating harmony and happiness, right? Wrong. Aphrodite's vanity was legendary, and she did not handle rejection well. When Arachne scoffed, Athena revealed herself, and the competition was on. Both of them wove incredible tapestries. Athena's depicted the majesty of the gods and the terrible fate of mortals who challenged them. It was a warning. Arachne, in an act of supreme defiance, wove a tapestry that depicted the gods' scandals, specifically Zeus's many affairs and deception. It was artistically perfect, but politically suicidal. Athena, enraged by both the perfection of the work and the insulting subject matter, flew into a rage. She destroyed Arachne's tapestry and, in some versions, beat the girl. In her despair, Arachne tried to hang herself, but Athena, in a final act of cruel, ironic punishment, transformed her into the world's first spider, cursing her and her descendants to weave forever. When a mortal man named Hippolytus, a devout follower of the virgin goddess Artemis, swore off love and women entirely, Aphrodite took it as a personal insult. How dare a mortal scorn her entire domain? Her revenge was devious. She didn't punish him directly. Instead, she cursed his stepmother Phaedra to fall madly and uncontrollably in love with him. This created a toxic, impossible situation that ultimately led to Phaedra's suicide and Hippolytus being falsely accused and tragically killed by his own father, Theseus. All this death and destruction, not because of some great crime, but because a young man's personal life choices offended a goddess's ego. And then there's Athena, the goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare. She was generally more level-headed than most, but even she had a breaking point, and it was usually related to her pride in her skills. The most famous example is her rivalry with a mortal weaver named Arachne. Arachne was a prodigy, a weaver of such incredible talent that people whispered she must have been taught by Athena herself. Arachne, full of pride, denied this and foolishly boasted that she was even better than the goddess. This was a challenge Athena could not ignore. She appeared, disguised as an old woman, and warned Arachne to be more humble, from Poseidon's grudges that could doom a sailor for a perceived slight. So, with all these stories of divine wrath and petty revenge, you might think that the best strategy for any mortal would be to just keep your head down, stay quiet, and try to go completely unnoticed by the gods. And that's not a bad strategy. But here's the twist. Attracting a god's attention wasn't always a death sentence. It was a double-edged sword. Divine notice could bring you ruin and misery, absolutely. But it could also bring you unimaginable success, power, and glory. The line between a divine blessing and a divine curse was terrifyingly thin, and sometimes they were one and the same. Let's look at the upside first. Being a favorite of a god was like having the most powerful patron in the universe. Look at Odysseus. His entire 10-year journey home from Troy in the Odyssey is basically a cosmic tug-of-war between two powerful deities. He is relentlessly tormented by Poseidon, who hates him for blinding his son, the Cyclops, but he is also fiercely protected and guided by Athena. She advocates for him in the councils of the gods. She gives him clever disguises, she whispers strategic advice in his ear, and she physically intervenes to save his life on multiple occasions. Without Athena's favor, Odysseus would have been dead 100 times over. His connection to her gave him the divine edge he needed to survive. Similarly, heroes like Heracles, despite being the target of Hera's unrelenting hatred, was also Zeus's son. This divine parentage gave him his supernatural strength, the very thing that allowed him to complete his impossible 12 labors. So, in his case, the same divine attention that brought a Cursera's wrath also brought the gift that enabled him to overcome it. Getting noticed by a god could elevate you from a simple mortal to a hero, a legend whose name would echo through eternity. It could grant you skills, like the prophetic sight given to Cassandra, or unmatched beauty, like Helen of Troy. But here's the curse side of that same coin. What happened to Cassandra? Apollo gave her the gift of prophecy because he desired her. When she rejected him, he couldn't take the gift back, so he twisted it. He cursed her so that no one would ever believe her true prophecies. She foresaw the destruction of Troy, the Trojan horse, and her own death, but was doomed to be ignored, treated as a madwoman. Her divine gift became her personal hell. and Helen's beauty. It was a gift from Aphrodite, but it was also the direct cause of the Trojan War, a conflict that led to the deaths of countless heroes and the razing of her city. This is the ultimate cosmic gamble. When a god noticed you, you were no longer in control of your own story. Your life became a stage 4 divine drama. You might be the star, or you might just be a prop. The same divine favor that made you a king could also make your kingdom the target of a jealous rival god. The love of a goddess could make you a hero, but it could also get you killed by her overprotective father or a vengeful divine suitor. The world of the Greeks was one where divine intervention was real and powerful, but it was also fickle and dangerous. It was a constant reminder that being a pawn in the game of the gods meant you could be promoted to a queen or sacrificed, without a second thought. So, after hearing all these stories of cheating, revenge, vanity, and cruelty, the big question is, why would a culture create gods who are so deeply, recognizably flawed? Why not imagine them as perfect, benevolent, and infallible beings, completely above the petty dramas of humanity? The answer is one of the most fascinating things about Greek mythology, and it gets to the very heart of how they saw the world, the gods, and themselves. The gods were so human because, in many ways, they were human, just amplified to a cosmic scale. First, let's think about the function of these stories. They weren't just scripture. They were also explanation and entertainment. The Greeks didn't have a unified scientific theory for why things happened. So, why does the earth shake? It's Poseidon in a rage. Why does the sun cross the sky? It's Apollo driving his chariot. Why do you feel that irrational, all-consuming pang of love or jealousy? It's Aphrodite or Hera messing with your emotions. These anthropomorphic gods provided a narrative framework for understanding the chaotic and often terrifying forces of nature and the human psyche. By giving these forces a personality, a flawed, relatable personality, it made the world feel a little less random. You might not be able to stop an earthquake, but you could at least try to appease the god who causes them. It gives a sense of agency, however small. Second, these gods served as a kind of cultural mirror. They reflected the values, the fears, and the social structures of ancient Greece. It was a patriarchal society, so it makes sense that their king of the gods, Zeus, would be an ultimate authoritative, but also dominant and promiscuous, reflecting the power dynamics of the time. Hera's plight, that of a powerful queen constantly undermined by her husband's infidelity, would have resonated with the experiences of mortal women, albeit on a much grander scale. The gods' obsession with honor, pride, and reputation, and the swift, violent retribution for perceived insults, mirrors the honor-based culture of ancient Greece. They weren't just making up stories. They were projecting their own societal norms and anxieties onto the heaven. But I think the most profound reason is psychological. The Greeks understood something fundamental about humanity. We are not perfect. We are creatures of contradiction. We can be noble and petty, loving and cruel, wise and foolish, often all in the same day. By creating gods who embodied these same contradictions, they were exploring the very nature of what it means to be human. The gods were a safe space to examine the most extreme aspects of our own behavior. Zeus's lust is human desire, untethered from consequence. Hera's jealousy is human resentment, given infinite power. This made the gods relatable. You could understand why they did what they did, even if you were horrified by it. It created a dynamic and complex relationship between mortals and the divine. You didn't just worship them out of fear. You might also feel pity for Hera, or frustration with Zeus, or admiration for Athena's cunning. They weren't just distant, abstract powers. They were cosmic characters you could engage with. This humanity is what makes them so enduring. They are not perfect moral exemplars, but a timeless, divine reflection of our own beautiful, messy, and flawed nature. So, we've journeyed through the scandals, the betrayals, and the divine drama of Mount Olympus. We've seen how Zeus's insatiable lust, Hera's righteous rage, and the petty squabbles of the entire pantheon shaped the lives of mortals, for better and for worse. What is the takeaway from all this? Why are we, thousands of years later, still so captivated by these stories? I think it is because the legacy of these flawed gods is woven into the very fabric of Western culture, and it's about so much more than just a list of names and myths. On one level, the influence is obvious. The names of the planets in our solar system, the constellations in the night sky, the language we use for concepts like narcissism or aphrodisiacs, the plots of countless books, movies, and TV shows, It's all steeped in this mythology. These divine soap operas provided a wellspring of character, archetypes and dramatic situations that storytellers have been drawing from ever since. The tormented hero, the vengeful queen, the wise mentor, the trickster, these roles were perfected on Mount Olympus. When you watch a modern drama about a powerful family tearing itself apart over ambition and betrayal, you're re-watching a story that has its roots in the house of Atreus or the court of Zeus. But the legacy goes deeper than that. These stories gave us a new way to think about the relationship between power and morality. The Greek gods teach us a crucial lesson, that power does not automatically confer goodness. In fact, absolute power can lead to absolute corruption. Zeus is the most powerful being in his universe, but he is far from the most moral. This idea that we should be skeptical of authority, that we should hold even the most powerful accountable for their actions, is a cornerstone of modern democratic thought. The Greeks weren't afraid to portray their gods as fallible, and in doing so, they gave us permission to question authority in our own world. Most importantly, the enduring legacy of these flawed gods is the humanity they represent. They hold up a mirror to us. The gods' struggles are our struggles, magnified to an epic scale. Their jealousy is our jealousy. Their love is our love. Their rage is our rage. By telling stories about gods who are messy, complicated, and contradictory, the ancient Greeks were telling us that it's okay to be messy, complicated, and contradictory. They remind us that our flaws are as much a part of our story as our virtues. These myths have survived for millennia, not just because they are entertaining, but because they are true, in the way that all great stories are true. They speak to the fundamental, unchanging chaos of the human heart. The divine family on Olympus, with all its affairs, its backstabbing, and its profound, dysfunctional love, is ultimately a reflection of our own families, our own societies, and our own souls. And that is a story that will never get old. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the messy lives of the Greek gods. It's a universe of stories that just keeps on giving. If you enjoyed this, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you don't miss our next journey into the ancient world. Let me know in the comments which god's personal drama you find the most fascinating. Until next time, stay curious.